In another episode of Paul is Right About Everything, President Zelensky has come out with the contours of a potential peace deal to end the Ukraine war. Is it exactly what I've been talking about this entire time? And why is Putin almost certainly going to tell him to pound sand? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is a really interesting story because Zelensky suggests ending what he calls, quote, the hot phase of the war in exchange for NATO membership without occupied territories. This is a really interesting sort of thread the needle. So the President Zelensky is saying that in order to end the hot phase of the war, Ukraine would have to offer membership to Ukrainian territory under government control, with the invitation recognizing the country's internationally recognized borders. This is code for Russian-occupied regions are still considered occupied regions and not independent states, right? He says, quote, if we want to stop that stage of the war, we should quickly take under NATO umbrella the territory of Ukraine that we have under our control. That's what we need to do first, and then Ukraine can get back to other parts of its territory in a diplomatic way. This is an interview with Sky News. Now, according to Kiev, he acknowledges that no one has ever offered that proposal to us officially. This is pretty clear. What's interesting is the word officially may actually be doing a fair amount of heavy work here. The reason is because he could be saying that literally no one has ever said this, but he could also be implying that it's possible that unofficially he's been told that this would look like a workable deal. And again, as an independent analyst who's outside of any major diplomatic channels like this, this does look like the closest thing to a workable deal. It gives Putin an off-ramp that doesn't involve him acknowledging that the Ukraine invasion was a disaster, but it also gives Ukraine a victory to say, look, we are guaranteed to be free from Russian domination, or at least highly likely to be free from Russian domination. Militarily, at least. Now, of course, this some reports indicate that this would entail Ukraine ceding territory. Now, Trump's plans have said that Ukraine needs to cede its territory and give up NATO accession plans, but this is unclear because, again, the U.S. does not get to speak for all of NATO. And Ukraine applied for NATO membership in September, but has not received a formal invitation. That requires, of course, a full invitation from all of its member states. And this is, you can see how quickly this becomes complex. But we're going to talk about why Putin is likely going to say that this plan is a non-starter. But of course, first, I wanted to say that if you feel like you need to find a way out of whatever's really crushing you this holiday season, you don't. You can get it all done. You might just need a little extra caffeine. That's why I created Strike Gum, inspired by my time in Afghanistan when I needed energy drinks, or at least energy on a long combat patrol, but all I had were military issue energy drinks. So I created the better energy drink alternative, Strike Gum, right? This little pack contains the equivalent of 5 Red Bulls worth of caffeine, 0 sugar, 100 milligrams alpha GPC, and best of all, it's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, right? So we are 20% off everything in the store. So if you've been waiting to stock up or you've been waiting to try Strike Gum for the first time, now's the time to do it, right? The holidays are here and it's kind of exhausting. So let Strike Gum be your secret weapon. Link is in the description. Okay. So here's the complex part. First off, like we said, in order to secure a NATO invitation, well, every NATO country needs to sign off on it. And that's a pretty tall order. But again, if it's something that the Russians, Americans, and Ukrainians all agree is necessary, then there's not going to be that many people who might really be interested in holding out on this, right? But each individual country may try to extract some additional concessions or demand certain things get added as part of their conditions, right? So again, never discount the ability of a country to really try to get a little bit of something on the side for any kind of deal. However, that's not the complex part. The real complex part is Putin. Why? Because right now, Putin is advancing steadily into Ukrainian territory. And you may notice that part of this membership drive would mean that any additional land of turf that Putin seizes would trigger Article 5 in NATO, right? And that's a problem, right? Because again, The Article 5 says that an attack into, an attack on Kramatorsk would be treated as Russian paratroopers dropping into Manhattan. So the problem, right, is that wherever they decide to freeze the front lines is where they're going to be stuck. And if you're Putin, you obviously started this whole invasion to seize all of Ukraine. So the fact is that the more he takes, the better off he's going to be. It's also going to involve strength of negotiations, right? If he controls, right now he controls about 20% of Ukrainian territory. If he can squeeze that up to 21%, for example, then he's going to be in a stronger negotiating position when he sits down with Kiev. But most importantly is that for almost 2 years, the front lines have been sort of locked in place, almost very, very, very static. And finally, Putin has fully militarized his economy. He has developed a strategy that essentially trades large numbers of lives for small amounts of territory. But Putin has a lot of lives to sacrifice. And so he's finally got a systematic way to bring in old, decrepit Russian men, give them plate carriers and AKs, and throw them into Ukrainian lines in order to drive the Ukrainians back. And this strategy is finally paying dividends for Putin, right? So why would he finally, at the high watermark of his own campaign in this war, why would he choose now to negotiate, right? Now, there's some reasons that he might, and this is sort of how you're starting to see how complex ending these things are, is that the old ruble USD exchange rate is having a real rough day, right? So let's see if we can get it. The USD ruble exchange, you can see here over the last year or so has been pretty poor in terms of performance, right? Now you can see that there was a huge collapse and then the Russian spiking the exchange rate to an all-time high, right? The ruble was never cheaper, or at least was at a 36-month low in November 27th, just a few days ago. Now it's down to 106. The central bank has intervened, but Russia doesn't have a lot of tools left in the toolkit to stabilize its currency. And it's every new recruit it pulls in and pays out a huge bonus to pushes that amount higher and higher. So Putin's war chest is starting to become expended. And so there's a lot of perception that, Putin may have to come to the table soon, because the reason the Russian public is tolerating this war of choice is because it hasn't really impacted their living standards, right? Russians still feel that wages are up. Yeah, inflation's up too. Unemployment's low. And they're in this sweet spot where essentially their lives are being subsidized by Russia's foreign currency reserves, right? Putin has a literal war chest, and he's stabilizing the Russian ruble by selling out funds from this war chest. But it's finally been expended. They don't have much else they can sell in order to fund this war effort effectively, or stabilize their currency, which in turn funds the war effort. Now the currency's destabilized. There's a huge problem on their hands, right? Because remember, if you needed to pay, let's say, 100 rubles, I'm using obviously way low numbers. Let's say Russia said, listen, new recruit, we'll pay you 100 rubles to sign up, fight, and die. And a Russian goes, that's a pretty good deal. My family can buy a lot of potatoes and vodka with that 100 rubles. Well, when 100 rubles in July, right, buys you, or if 86 rubles in July buys you what 130 rubles or 113 rubles does now you have to offer that Russian recruit 145 rubles to throw their life away for the same amount of potatoes and vodka. So it's going to escalate, right? Now multiply that times every drone that Russia makes, right? Who they have to buy these parts from overseas, right? From the Chinese. They have to hire workers to put these drones together, right? So all of this stuff is driving the Russian economy in an exponential fashion is the thought. Again, never underestimate the skill of the Russian central bank, right? Russia has a very capable central bank and a very capable central banker, but there's only so much you can do before inflation becomes exponential. It's one of the fears that the US had when we had 9% inflation 2 years ago, where there was real fears that the Fed wouldn't be able to get it under control, and that if it had already sort of begun its exponential growth curve. Luckily for us, the Fed crushed it like it was going out of style, and inflation never took off. But it's not clear that Russia can operate the same way. They can't run that same playbook. So while there might be some temporary stabilization policies in place, I don't think it's going to be a long-term solution. And so that may force Putin to the negotiating table. Again, the price of sanctions, the price of simply these dead soldiers may get him to the negotiating table, but it's unclear if he's willing to do so when he feels that he's got Ukraine on the ropes, right? And this is sort of the problem that I think the incoming Trump administration is going to have to run into, is that Putin is going to have to feel the heat to sit at that negotiating table. Zelensky said, I'm already willing to negotiate. And I'm actually, by saying this, he's saying, listen, I'm actually willing to entertain some recognition of Russian-controlled territory. But the person who isn't yet willing to entertain their territory, this sort of discussion, is Putin. So Putin needs to feel that the longer he waits, the worse his situation gets. Not better, the worse. So I think what'll have to happen is the Trump administration will have to get Zelensky to say, yep, I will sit down regardless of what happens on the battlefield. And then they're going to have to find a way to put the screws to Vladdy Daddy in order for him to feel, yeah, if I don't make a deal now, I'm going to be in a way worse shape later. And that, again, is probably going to combine an economic collapse, like we're starting to see the signs of, and a battlefield collapse. It's going to require some level of short-term, decisive military action by Ukraine. And honestly, if we're realistic, the only way to do that would be through some pretty significant intervention by its NATO partners. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to Bill Collier, Robert and Colberg, guys, Martin, Eugenia Quester, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karius, L90, Petra Teruru, all of our lieutenant tier members, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.